Lights, camera, action. On this week's show, we have a very, very good friend of mine from back in the day, who's also a lecturer of sociology at Greenwich University, who's going to be talking about, you know, the hip hop culture from like an academic point of view. So it's going to be a very, very interesting chat and something totally different to what I've actually covered before. So yeah, I can't wait. We have, as I say, one of my best mates. We have the one and the only Dr. Craig Morris in the place. Yes, Craig, how you doing, my man?
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on board, and you know, this is going to be something quite different because, as I say, you're going to kind of come at this from like an academic kind of point, like an angle. So yeah, it's going to be something totally different to what I've done before.
Yeah, it's interesting for me as well. It's well, I suppose when I was first interested in it was as a teenager, and it was a youth culture, and it was something that blew my mind from the start, really. You know, I was thinking, wow, what's this? What's going on? This music, and you know, the different aspects of hip hop, which we'll talk about in a bit, no doubt, because I know you ask questions like that. And then in later life, it's something that I'm still fascinated by the music. I still buy records today, which will be great fun when I move, because I've got about 3,000 now. That's the only problem with vinyl; it's heavy. But yeah, and it's something that in later life I've come to reflect on in this more academic way. So
well,
yeah,
totally.
There's something vaguely interesting for people who are watching.
Well, totally. And, you know, we didn't realize that this kind of hip hop culture would still be around, you know, 40 odd years later. You know, it's like, and it's still as big as what it's probably bigger than what it's ever been.
Yeah, yes, that's a good point you make. I mean, I remember in the early 80s, it was very much spoken about as a fad, as something that wouldn't last, as something that would pass. And now we're in 2020. You know, decades later, and it's really interesting. You've got leading figures who were in this youth culture. They're now retirement age, so it's gone, and it's a multi-generational culture as well. You know, you've got young people still interested in it. You've got old geezers like me and you, and you've got people even older who, I mean, you know, Grandmaster Flash, someone who fascinates me.
Well, you know, as I say, you know, like those, the kind of the first generation kind of, you know, the legends that made hip hop what it is today. You know, they're kind of in their kind of 60s.
Exactly. So not only did it last, it became this global thing that's multi-generational, and has come to influence all sorts of other musical forms as well. But I mean, I'm going to talk about that stuff in a little bit. So
yeah. So what we'll do, we'll have a little breakdown, a little bit of like your kind of early history, just so people can kind of, you know, touch on, you know, how you got into the hip hop culture, and, you know, and what it was like growing up. So yeah, the first two questions I always ask is, you know, whereabouts are you from, and what was it like growing up as a youngster?
Yeah, I was actually born in Plumstead. I was born in St Nick's Hospital, which isn't there anymore. And I grew up in Shooters Hill, sort of the Welling side of Shooters Hill, very close to the bottom there. Yeah, you ask this question a lot, don't you? What was it like growing up? I mean, I'm 50. I was born in 1970, so I was a child in the 70s. And I mean, you'll remember this, Steve. It was very different to how things are for kids now. I used to play out in the street all day, every day, riding bikes, doing that 40-40 game, and just playing with kids and curveball and all that sort of stuff. Anyone who grew up, particularly like me, who grew up in a close, is still very good at playing curveball, because we didn't get a lot of through traffic, so we practiced that one a lot as well. And yeah, it was good. It was good, and yeah.
You know what I found out, what I find about, you know, the 70s era is there was a lot more community spirit, and families were a lot closer together, because, you know, families kind of lived sometimes in the same street, the same area, or you know, like a few miles apart. There was always kind of family parties going on, where nowadays everyone's kind of separated.
Yeah. For a lot of people, that was the case.
And what, you know, that's kind of, it's kind of touched on that, but what kind of music was you growing up on? I mean, you know, you was obviously watching TV programs like Top of the Pops, you know, with the top 40. So that must have had like a big influence on your musical taste. And it did with me a little bit too. I mean, a lot of the top 40 was absolutely crap. But, you know, there was bits and pieces, you know, in there that was actually brilliant, you know, musical wise. You know, you had a lot of good, like, you know, Motown stuff and like two-tone music and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I suppose my mum was the one who had the records in our household, and she had a lot of stuff on Motown. She had a lot of stuff on Stax as well. So I suppose what you would call 60s R&B, you know, and that R&B is very different to the sort of 80s and 90s R&B, obviously. But that was some of the music that was around. And I think when you were a kid in the 70s, you were very limited in the media that you could access. It was mainstream radio, and I suppose it was Top of the Pops and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that music, like you say, it was a load of rubbish. And there's a reason they call the music industry, because it produces a product, and they're more interested in commercial success than necessarily what I suppose I would call good music. But when you're a kid, you kind of don't care, really, do you?
And you know, this is the big question now. I mean, basically, what was it that kind of lit the flame for you to get into hip hop?
Hip hop. In the latter part of the 70s, I started to notice the slightly older kids who were into the very visibly different subcultures like punk or skinhead or any of those kind of things. And a little bit later on, the mod revival in the early 1980s and things like this. So to become very sort of attuned to this idea that for certain types of music, you dressed a certain way, and there were certain forms of behaviour, and I found that quite strange, I suppose. And I suppose that was a predictor for someone who would go on to become a sociologist decades later on. But for some reason, that interested me, and the different kinds of musics really interested me as well. And then something in Britain happened when I was 9, in 1979. The Tory government was elected, Margaret Thatcher's government, and things became very divisive. I mean, you'll remember, we were only kids still, but the riots in 1981 and all kinds of things like this. It was a bit of a sort of a strange time and things like this. So on the one hand, society was sort of being fractured. It was being pulled apart. There was a lot of division. But then this thing, hip hop, came along. And that, for me, changed everything, you know?
And that's it started bringing in like unity. I mean, so how would you say that hip hop changed? You know, changed back then. Would you say it's because, you know, people were coming together?
I think. Well, I think it's born out of a response to certain social problems, and that's something that I'll talk about in a minute. I was thinking about, because a question you often ask is, what are your earliest memories of hip hop and things like this? And again, it's all a bit sort of broken up, really. And I think the first time I could have possibly heard rap music was, and everyone says this, and it's not one of the great sort of records that you cling to and stuff like this, but the Sugar Hill Gang on Top of the Pops. And I checked it, and it was 1979, you know. And I can't imagine that I could have heard anything before then. I mean, as a 9-year-old, I doubt if I heard King Tim 111, you know. So
but the thing is, though, that's the first time that we'd heard, you know, rap music, you know, with Curtis Blow and all that. But
yeah,
that was not hip hop. That was basically that was rap music. So the elements of hip hop had not come together yet. So what did it spark you off to be into that proper kind of, you know, like hip hop in terms of all the elements coming together with the MC and the DJ and the breaking and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think for me, it took a while for me to grasp that it was all part of one thing, because I saw little elements of it at different times and stuff like that. And I think, I mean, you might remember this. I think it was 1982 when Channel 4 first came on British television, and you started seeing a lot of American TV. They had things like Hill Street Blues, for example. And I remember seeing there were little bits of graffiti on there. A lot of the time, you know, they had sort of gang members in the stories on Hill Street Blues, and they had graffiti. And you were sort of getting exposed to this urban New York kind of culture, kind of way of living, or one aspect of that at least. And it's interesting, really, isn't it? Because I know you were, was it was it T Kid you were talking to recently? It
Yeah,
was, wasn't
tickets.
it?
Yeah, yeah.
And you were having this conversation about graffiti and how old graffiti is, and he was talking about the late '60s first of all, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah, and also Mike 171, one of the original wall writers that was, you know, writing with like Tacky 183 and, you know, all the kind of some of the originators of that kind of wall writing. I mean, don't get me wrong, the wall writing was even around before then with Kilroy and tags like that.
Yeah.
But they was the ones that were kind of bringing in that kind of next style with their kind of tags, and, you know, started putting their names up on the trains in the early, you know, late 60s and the early 70s.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I think graffiti is a thing which, to some degree, existed outside of the hip hop culture, and then the other elements of it, for me, seem to have sort of arisen within that basement party, block party kind of existence and things like this. So, and I know you talk about those early DJs a lot. And how they put on parties, and, you know, the wiring it into the street lighting, and you know, the big sound systems and Cool DJ Herc and all these kinds of things, and how the DJing technique evolves from just playing records to starting to think about, are there particular parts, you know, so we talk about these as breaks and things like this, and starting to isolate those parts and sort of make music from music. So they start to manipulate the music by way of using turntables and the mixer in a certain way. And all of this stuff is kind of fairly well known. So DJ develops in that way. And then the MC sort of being the sort of accompaniment to the DJ, first of all, and how that develops from just sort of shout outs and
hyping up the crowds, and
yeah, to phrases, to sentences, to sort of verses, and it just goes from sort of odd remarks to something more fully formed like rap, like we would think about, and then the whole b-boy thing as well. So these other two elements are producing the soundtrack, and then dance comes into this more and more and more. And the thing that interests me most from a sociological perspective is how all four of those elements, so graph, DJing, MCing, the whole b-boy thing, they're all competitive, if you think about it. So DJing, who's got the best records? And sometimes covering them up with little white labels, which we used to do over here in the mid to late 80s to stop people knowing what beats you've got and things like this. How the techniques of DJing, you know, how you manipulate records, how loud your sound system is, how often you play out, and things like this, you know. MCing, it's kind of been competitive and about battles from very, very early on. B-boying, whether it's single or in crew, is clearly about battling. It's clearly about who's got the best moves and things. And even graffiti, again, which you spoke about a lot in different interviews. You know, who's got the best style, who can get up the most. I mean, this term AllCity, who can be AllCity, who can be seen in the widest thing.
In all boroughs, yeah.
The elements of hip hop are about competition. And for me, this is how hip hop developed. You've got largely socially excluded young people. They don't have a lot of opportunities. They live in relatively poorer parts of the boroughs of New York. And American society, it's all about, you know, that American dream, success, status, But how do you get status if you grow up in a group where you're denied the resources to be able to get that? Well, one way you do it is you make your own game. And I think that's what hip hop is. It's something that was invented by excluded people that they could be good at, that they could laugh, that they could get a status in. You know, I'm AllCity. I've got a crown over my tag, or I'm the best MC in the South Bronx, or I'm the best DJ in Brooklyn, or you know, I'm part of the best b-boy crew in the world, or something like this. It's all about competition
and also it's also about showmanship.
Very, very much so. Very much so. There's a whole set of aesthetics to it. DJing techniques can be very showy. You know, surely that thing where you spin around and you're flipping the fader behind your back and all this kind of stuff, or b-boying, you know, pulling a certain move out and everyone's just like, boom, like this. You know, it's very much about those things, and it absolutely fascinates me.
And and it's also, you know, it's also about style and fashion as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also as it's progressed, about generations and stuff. So if you look at the way rappers changed across generations, there's a funny video on YouTube somewhere comparing really old school rappers and contemporary ones. And they you've seen it.
Yeah.
And they got this battle, and it's like the meeting of two things that don't quite recognise each other. But that is the past and the present of the same culture. You know?
And it'll be quite interesting to see what it's going to be like in another 20 years.
Yeah, hopefully we've still got enough time on our tickets to see that. I think that's how and why it appears. I think it's a cultural response to the social problems of poverty, exclusion, limited opportunities, and things like this. Because if you think about it, hip hop as a culture is made from fairly easily accessible resources, some records and turntables and a mixer. I mean, if you want to be a b-boy, what do you really need? You need some vinyl. You know, graffiti, you go out and, you know, the more famous people always talk about nicking the paint. They never talk about buying the paint. So that didn't cost them anything at all. And if you want to be an MC, you need a mic. It's relatively simple things from which a whole global culture has been made. I mean, I remember a number of years ago, I sat down and it was 4:45 on a Saturday afternoon. I was looking at the football results, and all of a sudden there's the instrumental. I can't remember who it is now, but there's the instrumental or some rap track underneath the football results. And I thought, yeah, hip hop has totally gone worldwide. It is the soundtrack to not just itself, but to all sorts of other things. Football results. It's on all sorts of film scores. It's on adverts on TV. It's everywhere and massive. And it's become that from this really small scene, you know, in the South Bronx. Very small numbers of people. And getting from there to here is this massive story. And it's a really interesting story, but it's funny. If you go on Amazon and you do an Amazon search, history of hip hop, there's thousands of things, books and DVDs and all sorts of stuff. So just telling that story, the history of hip hop, has become an industry in itself. There's thousands of books and documentaries and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, you've only got to look at back in the day, you know, when books like Subway Art was coming out. You know, I mean, that blew our minds, didn't it? Subway Art. Yeah,
totally. I've still got mine down underneath the television, just down there. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and for me, I was thinking about, well, how do I fit into this little picture? And I remember being about 13, I think. And a couple of funny things. One of them was when you first came to the school I was at. And I said to you about this the other day, didn't I? I remember seeing you for the first time, and you had these trainers on. Were they white high-tech with red? Did you have white?
It might have been the high-tech text, the boots with the big tongues.
I'm sure it's funny. When these are really significant moments, you remember them. Like, ask me what I was doing last week. I haven't got a bloody clue. But 1983, this new kid, you, comes to the school, you got them trainers on, and I look, and you got puffs in, multicoloured puffs. And
That's right.
straight
I
away
remember
I
them. Yeah.
knew he likes the music I like. Because youth cultures, you know, the dress, the music, the attitudes, it's always that triangle. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, he's into this thing. And me and you just gelled very, very fast, didn't we? And I
Oh yeah,
think
straight away. Yeah, straight away.
yeah.
I mean,
And I
as
think
soon as you come up to me and said, "Are you into hip hop?" It was like we was off. You know, I mean, we're sitting here now,
yeah,
37 or 38 or whatever many years it is now, talking about it.
yeah, which is bizarre in itself. It really is. I think it was also that year that I was listening to Tim Westwood on LWR. So a lot of people of our age, you know, LWR, you are in tune to the best in
Yeah,
London.
London town.
92.5, you know, that drilled into our heads. And LWR was a sod to get on the radio because it was a pirate. But I had this little sort of tape radio thing. It was a one speaker one, not a two speaker one. But it had this bizarrely long aerial. And if you stretched the aerial all the way out, you could pick up just about anything. And I would listen to his show, you know, a number of times a week. And as everyone did in the old days, you know, taping stuff and all those kinds of things. And that was my way into a bigger world. Because as you remember, go on, Steve.
Thing is, Craig, what I noticed, you know, I come from Southeast London. I grew up in, you know, Cholton, Woolwich. My family all from like New Cross and Deptford and all around there. So I was getting that kind of, we wasn't calling it hip hop. It was called electro funk back in 1982. And this is before breaking and all that. So when I moved from my area to Kent, to where you are, I was thinking these country bumpkins, there's going to be no scene at all. I was going to kind of be on my own, you know, with no mates. And I was totally surprised. There was a small percentage of people from that area that was bang into electro and hip hop.
Yeah, definitely. Geographically, it's a funny one because when it changes from the London postcodes to the London Borough of Bexley postcodes, you feel like you're in a completely different place. But it's actually like a couple of, I mean, if you look at where I grew up, one side of Shooters Hill, if you're on the other side of a hill, you're on the London postcodes. And I think it just sort of leaked out slowly, you know, and a lot of us were into that sort of music as well. And LWR for me, because it wasn't just playing music, it was talking about, you know, events that were on, jams or whatever we called them. I can't even remember what we called them, you know. And they were really interesting. And something I only realised, this is quite significant, I think. Something I only realised in about the last 10 years, a lot of those things that we went to, like Drill Hall, just sort of random like halls and spaces a lot of it was in South London and things like this. A lot of them were funded by the GLC, the Greater London Council. And this comes back to the politics of it. Because since 79, you'd had this Tory government that had been very divisive, and they were totally clashing with London's sort of local government, if you like, the Greater London Council. And that was Ken Livingstone, or Red Ken as they called him. So he was a completely different end of the political spectrum. And he was very keen on funding a lot of things that would bring young people together of different cultural backgrounds, like black and Asian and white and what have you, kids, you know. So a lot of those things we went to, they were funded as projects. But when you're 13, you don't think in this way at all, do you? You don't realise anything like this. But for me, hip hop, it's always within this political sort of context, you know. And that was about anti-racism and multiculturalism, which we could do with a lot of today. Funny how these things come around and what the parallels are, isn't it? Because we're going through different times with that at the moment. Yeah, and then it was going to, I mean, I remember going with you to Run DMC in the Electric Ballroom in Camden. That was 84. And going to
80, that was 85, that was. Yeah.
I was,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was, oh, okay. In my head, it was 84, but yeah, all right, cool.
But
And
yeah, that was amazing, wasn't it? Absolutely brilliant.
yeah, brilliant. That was in because I think there was an afternoon one and an evening one, and we went to the afternoon one, and you walked in there off of a high street on a Saturday afternoon in England, and all of a sudden you're in this completely different realm, you know, and that's how it felt to me because we were still young, you know, 14 or 15. And we walked into that. I'm like, what is going on here? This is the best thing ever. You know, there's all breaking going off and DJing, warming up. And I think Tim Westwood was wearing some strange yellow suit, which I couldn't quite get my head around. But it was like, welcome to hip hop land, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, there was other places popping off. You know, we was going to Spats and, you know, all these, there was loads of things going on.
Yeah, Spats was good because it was a really small space. So you couldn't help but be right on top of it. So if people were breaking and battling, you were right on top of it because there wasn't any room not to be right on top of it, you know. But what interests me about these things, they were all in the daytime and they were all teenagers. And there's some parallels there. Like when you read about mod culture and stuff, and it constantly talks about the first mods were teenagers. They were really young. And that's what we were then. You know, and I think the older kids, they were probably the soul boys still, weren't they?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but we were in this different thing. We were only a few years younger than them, but we were totally different. You know, really interesting.
Can you, how would you say that, you know, hip hop culture has changed over time?
How's it changed over time? Well, it became a lot more commercialized, and I don't necessarily mean that in the bad way. What I mean by that, first of all, is it became a thing that you could sell. So if you look at very early hip hop, and I know that you know this, it exists before rappers were making records. You know, so it was a live music scene. It wasn't really a thing that was a commodity.
That's
You
right.
know,
And most of it was all put onto tape, onto cassette tape. It wasn't recorded onto vinyl.
yeah. And then they became copied and copied and copied. And I guess
Yeah.
if you were at the end of that chain, the quality was pretty rubbish. But and they were passed around the 5 boroughs and all this kind of stuff. And then rap starts being recorded, you know. But also the other elements of hip hop become commodified as well. So do you remember those You Can Break Dance VHS? Those things.
Yeah.
So people start turning it into a commodity to be bought and sold. That's one of the ways it changes. Of the more obvious ways it changes, well, it changes in terms of technique. So the sophistication of the way the rappers use language. If you compare someone like Curtis Blow to someone like Big Daddy Kane, I've just pulled these two out of the sky without thinking about it too much. But the sophistication, the way the rhythm changes, the rhyming, you know, the manipulation of words with someone like Big Daddy Kane, also I think Rakim as well, at the same kind of time. Compared to those early rappers, already it sounds very different, you know, and sometimes rap becomes a bit more aggressive and that kind of stuff too. I think one of the other big changes was the change in the significance from the DJ to the producer. Because there's a certain point, now I know that some of the producers had been DJs, but you know what I mean. It's not so much now about cutting up tracks anymore. It's about programming drum machines and then using some samples as well and looping it. But the technology changes, so the sound changes as well, you know. And b-boying just became ever more crazy. And if you watch it now, they sort of defy gravity, and I don't know how they don't snap themselves in half. And I mean, I'm 50, so you know, I'm getting involved in any of that craziness. But that's just gone up through the levels, really. you know. So yeah, it changed in a number of ways. I think also rap sometimes is a lot more political than the way it started out as. If you look at by the late 80s, now I'm the #1 fan, by the way. I know you interviewed Chuck D, and I still can't believe that. I just thought, this is one of my oldest friends. He's interviewing Chuck D from Public Enemy. This is the best thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I was properly flipping out. But if you listen to a lot of Public Enemy, it's very political. It's asking questions about power. It's asking questions about race and how the police treat black people, and, you know, questions that we're still dealing with now in 2020. I mean, I think Chuck D is probably more relevant now than he's ever been, you know? So it changes in so many ways, and we haven't got 3 hours, so I'll leave that question at that point, you know?
And what kind of impact would you say hip hop had on society?
Well, it's, first of all, I think, is the scale of it, and this is sort of something I alluded to before. It's gone from this live music scene, very small, very in the know, only in certain boroughs of New York, to spreading out around the world, hasn't it? You know, so it's gone from what we would call a subculture, a very small thing, to a sort of a global culture, if you want. But having said that, when you go around the world, it's a bit like, I know this is going to sound funny, it's a bit like McDonald's. You know, when you go to another country in McDonald's and you recognise some of the stuff, but some of the stuff's a bit localised as well. That's kind of how hip hop is, you know. So if you were listening to, I know this is a while ago now, French rap, but MC Solar, someone like that, for example. Well, surprise, surprise, he's rapping in French. Well, he would be, because he's French and his audience is in France. And he's rapping about issues that relate to you know, to them as younger people and the struggles they have in society. So there's that shared kind of theme that hip hop has, but it's also about sort of local things as well. And then I think other ways that it's changed, it's just become this sort of global mega industry now. I mean, if you look at who would be the examples here, the examples here would be the guy who owns Def Jam, for example, Dr. Dre. Some of these people, I mean, they're worth, I don't know, some fraction of $1 billion or maybe $1 billion or something. So hip hop has become this industry. You know, I mean, I suppose Dr. Dre is a good example, because those Beats headphones, you know, that has completely outstripped his music and his production, which he's made an absolute fortune and an enormous success out of. But he's got his name on some headphones as well, and they're worn by people who probably don't even know who he is, probably don't even listen to rap and stuff like that. So it's broken out into all other sorts of industries as well.
Well, it's like Michael Jordan with the basketball, and, you know, like the Jordan going into like with Nike and the you know, the Jordan and the Air Force Ones and all that.
Yeah, exactly. He crossed. It's crossed over. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's crossed over.
You helped my thinking with that. This is another thing about these conversations. I'm not here with all the answers. I'm here with as many questions, and I'm getting lots of things to think about out of what we're talking about. But yeah, he crossed over from being a basketball player to a household name. You know, Hollywood mainstream films. And going back to what we were talking about at the start, people thought rap music would be this 5-minute fad. Wind on to 2020, guess what? It has sort of permeated everything in day-to-day life. You can't walk down the street without hearing some rap music somewhere.
And also, yeah, it's not also just about the rap music. I think you were just going to touch on this. It's also about what you're wearing, style and fashion. I mean, you know, we're rocking that hip hop look, you know, like, you know, with the shell toes, or the, you know, the Nikes or the Adidas, and
that's a really good point. Sportswear originally used to be worn by people doing sport. Now you go down the road, tracksuit trainers, it's become mainstream clothing. Well, hip hop had a massive part in that because it was the uniform, wasn't it? Although interestingly, it wasn't always the uniform. And I sometimes show my students pictures of like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and
What with the leather and the studded
the
gloves
leather and the studs
yeah.
and things. And I say they were rappers, and they're looking at me like, "No, you're having us on. You're winding us up." But I suppose with those Def Jam artists, Run DMC, LL Cool J, Adidas, and these, you know, the other streetwear brands and stuff, they started to cross over as just something you wore on a day to day, you know. So yeah, it's totally influenced fashion, film, other forms of music. You look at the other forms of music that have arisen from this. You know, in the British perspective, I mean, drum and bass, looking at break beats, chopping them up, speeding them up, manipulating the sound. You look at things like grime and stuff. Well, without hip hop, there aren't MCs. So, you know, no disrespect to anyone, it doesn't exist if hip hop hadn't existed, does it? The other thing that I find really interesting is how, for people like me, having been really into hip hop, especially in the 80s, I then started to look at, well, what are the records they're sampling? And that opened the door onto a really wide variety of music that I've been into ever since. So, you know, soul and jazz and jazz funk and all kinds of things. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this. There's a record by Sonic, and it's talking about, you'll probably know the name of it, but I can't remember which one it is. I've got the album and I should have done my homework and prepared. It's talking about how some people said hip hop is just ripping off old funk and stuff. And whichever MC it is from Sonic, he's kind of saying something like, well, if it wasn't for us, people would have forgotten about all that old music. You know, rap, I think there's a line, rap brings back old R&B, and if we had not, people would have forgot, or something like that. And it opened this door onto like 60s and 70s music, which, well, 60s music I wasn't even born, and 70s music I was a child. But, you know, the particularly funk and jazz funk and things, of which I've now got thousands of records. So hip hop led me to a love of other forms of music. It also led me, especially by way of Public Enemy and Chuck D, to questioning a lot of things. And I think that's how I became interested in sociology. So from what initially looked like a kid who's interested in this music that everyone says will last for 5 minutes, it has defined major aspects of my life. And I'm 50 years old, and now my main mission is I've got to get my 10-year-old daughter into all this music, because when I die, what happens to my records? You know, funny things like that, because there's a hell of a lot of them.
Yeah, or you can flog them and buy her a car.
Yeah, no. can't sell my records ever.
And talking of records, you know, one of the questions I always ask people is, you know, can you give me a selection of tracks? It doesn't have to be hip hop that kind of blew you away. You was like, wow, this blew me away, this track. It was on repeat.
That is a really hard question for me. That's a bit like asking football fans, what's your favourite ever goal? You know, there's so many records that if I play them still, the hairs on the back of my arms stand on end.
So give me a little selection of some of them tracks.
A lot of it's electro still, interestingly. Al Nafish, Hashim, I've never... No,
Hashim, It's Time.
Yeah, It's Time, that thing. That was a big one. Planet Rock was a big record for me. Electric Kingdom was a big record for me. Wild Style by Time Zone is a record I really, really like. That cover of the Gil Scott, you know what I'm going to say now, the cover of the Gil Scott Heron record, in the bottle,
Mm.
It was
CO,
COD.
with all the electro style COD, yeah,
Yeah,
COD in a
yeah,
bottle.
that's. I still think that's brilliant.
It's using a bit of the Smurf sample in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Smurf, Tyrone Brunson, and I mean, there's some really obscure stuff as well, like British electro from that time. The Willesden Dodgers as well.
Mm.
Not This President, and I can't remember. So I've not got the best memories. I'm a funny person to interview.
I know Nutriment as well. London
Yeah,
Bridge is
London
falling
Bridge.
down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what was the one from Manchester? Broken Glass Crew, Style of the Street or something. And then Def Jam is clearly huge. Mid to late 80s, Def Jam is huge. Run DMC, LL Cool J. So the radio album with Rock the Bells and all that stuff on it, which is a gift for hip hop DJs. There's so many things they still cut up from that now.
And this is a little tricky question for you. And is there kind of like a positive message that you can send to the younger generation?
Wow. Well, we're in difficult times, and no one needs me to tell them that. The whole COVID thing has been bizarre, and the disruption it's going to cause to the economy and that it's caused to people's everyday lives. I never thought we'd live. You know, we're very lucky growing up in the West. We often don't realise how fortunate we are. Some people deal with famine and disease and stuff on an ongoing basis. You know, we're largely insulated from this, and I think it's taught comfortable Westerners a few lessons about how life can often be. I don't really know how to frame this. For me, young people, try and be positive, try and stay out of trouble, because trouble easily finds you, and we don't have to have that discussion. But I think you know some of the things I'm talking about from when we were kids. And try and have a plan. Try and do something you enjoy. I mean, I somehow fell into being a lecturer. They pay me to talk. They pay me to talk about fascinating things. That's money for nothing. It's not even work. I just turn up and do it, and it's brilliant. And I think if you can find something you love and you can make a living out of it, for me, that's always been the key, you know.
Mm. Well, Craig, listen, it's been an absolutely brilliant chat, and I hope you've kind of quite enjoyed this, because it's something a little bit different.
It's very different and very, very enjoyable, and I could talk for hours, but we'll do that when I catch up with you.
Yeah, definitely. And listen, anybody watching this, subscribe to my channel. Press the subscribe button. I've interviewed Man Parish, Public Enemy, DJ Qbert, Scheme, T-Kid, Rodney P. London Posse, Skinny Man, DJ Cash Money, DJ Pogo, Cutmaster Swift. Too many to name. So subscribe to the channel, and yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this because it's been something a little bit kind of different.
Nice. No, I can't believe this has been about an hour. I just looked at the clock on my phone.
Yeah.
Brilliant, Steve. It's been brilliant. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, as we say in England.
Yeah. And we could talk forever. But listen, peace, my man. Stay safe.
I can die happy now, because I've been interviewed by the same person who interviewed Chuck D, who is my probably all-time hero. So nice.